This is another Read Me Something reward for Reich E. Spore's Patreon. We are reading from my Oz-based novel, Polychrome, Chapter 41. The sun came up like a bolt of flaming lightning, except lightning stops, and the sun didn't. I wasn't sure how far I had to come. My best guess was 20 miles. 20 miles. Hardly anything. I biked 40 when I was a wussy little kid. I can walk at 6 miles per hour. I could do this in 4 hours. But the gray, brown, white sand slipped under my boots, and I didn't dare fall if I could possibly avoid it. I was a couple of feet closer to the sand now than I'd been even on Thunderchild's low deck, and not protected by wood and space from the savage, gnawing power of the deadly desert. If I hadn't been a true mortal, I'd have been dead long since, maybe from the moment Daemon threw me to the ground. As it was, my legs itched in that tight, hot way that warned me the itches would become pain in time. I had the gnome mask firmly fastened across my face. I might have to loosen it from time to time, but I had to balance the need for cooling with the need to keep from breathing poison. And I was going to need cooling, that was certain. Already I could feel myself warming up on my left side, and the coolness of the night was fading fast. At least it is my left side, I thought. That meant I'd taken the right direction last night. I'd been pretty sure I was heading south, but it had been a terrible, lingering doubt that somehow I'd gotten turned around and ended up going the wrong way. But going south meant the rising sun on the left. My muscles weren't protesting too much yet, but I'd only been going for a couple of hours. I'd spent some of the evening right after Daemon's fall collecting up what I'd been able to carry. Mostly water, of course, as I had a relatively short distance to go, or so I hoped, and with water and some salty foods to keep the electrolytes balanced, I should be functionally all right. The problem was the damn featurelessness of the desert. It had dunes and valleys and blowing sand, but all of it looked pretty much the same, and the wind erased traces of passage, so it was really hard to know where you'd come from. I had to keep rechecking my bearings using the sky, and once the sun started getting high up, that might be a problem. The white-hot disk of the sun bombarded me with light that seemed impossibly twice as hot as it had been on Thunderchild. Or maybe not impossibly. My sand boat had done most of the work, and now I was doing all the work. A lot of work to go short distances on dunes like this. The sand slid backwards, mocking the very idea of forward motion, flowing out from under my feet like an escalator going the wrong way. Sweat trickled down my neck, more of it down my face. My mouth and nose felt like they were breathing inside a saturated oven. I slipped, caught myself, kept going. I had to keep making choices about how to deal with each obstacle. That dune lay right across my path. I pretty much had to go over it. But the next one ended not all that far off to the left. I could go around it, but that lengthened the route. If I did that, I'd be walking more like 30 miles. Of course, climbing up a dune slowed me up and took energy, and I couldn't charge heedlessly down the other side to try and make up the time. Better face it, you're doing the equivalent of 30 miles or more either way you try it. Take the route that takes the least effort. I reached the top of the next dune and stopped, breathing heavily, fighting the urge to rip the mask off. No, do not let yourself do that. Finish catching your breath. The gnomes made these things just fine. You're not suffocating, no matter what it feels like. I drew on years of self-control over my breathing, my heart rate, my body, and forced relaxation, acceptance, slow, slower. Finally, I could tell my breathing was normal. I yanked the mask off and hung it off the pack. Then took out a cloth, wiped the inside, and wiped my face. Time for a drink and a bite. I'd chosen this spot deliberately. There were hardly any shadows left by now, so the main point wasn't to avoid the sun. It was to avoid the slow, lethal fumes which rose from the sand. The highest point available kept me out of the worst of it, although there wasn't any true refuge outside of the mask. And the mask itself was not an unalloyed blessing. I had to take my time drinking and even eating. Absorbing the water was vital, and I couldn't just gulp it all down, much as I wanted to. I took out another mask, putting the first away. This would give the first one more time to dry out. I yanked the mask on and continued walking. Now my shins inside the boots were hurting, a raw and nasty feeling like I'd ripped them bleeding on pavement and then put rough canvas around them. Sand working its way into the boots, feeling stuff like that all over now. Even though I was in better shape than I had ever been, I was starting to feel this. I was feeling it a lot. My legs were aching inside, too much climbing up and cautious sliding down. It occurred to me there might be a better way. This is some of the most magical real estate in all of Fairy. Gotta be. So, I stopped in one of the valleys, regained my bearings, though the sun was nearing its peak, which meant I had to also check with the wind. All right. As I had when fighting Iris and Polly months ago, seemed like years, I raised both arms above my head and brought them down, channeling my anti-magic into the blow and visualizing it as a shockwave moving out from me. A cataclysmic wavefront exploded outward, smashing the dunes before me like sand castles before a tsunami, rolling onward. There was a squalling screech, and I saw one of the gargantuan antlion creatures hurled skyward. It landed in a cloud of dust, and I saw more sand ripple as it fled. But as I surveyed the results and tried a few cautious steps, I realized to my chagrin that I'd made things worse. Along the widening path of the shockwave, the sand had been roiled and shaken to the point that it was of an almost unbelievably loose consistency. I'd sink to my knees, maybe just keep sinking if I tried walking through that. Well, that was brilliant, hero. Now you've got a quarter-mile detour to make. I made it past my ill-considered experiment, forced my way onward. One good aspect of it was that undoubtedly the local unnatural wildlife had just been given an unmistakable lesson as to how very, very bad an idea it would be to mess with me, which meant that I hopefully would not have to actually fight anything. I realized I'd been trudging along for close to half an hour, mostly staring at my feet, one foot in front of the other. Get your bearings. Sun on your left. You need to... I froze, my heart hammering, as I realized what I'd almost done. The sun had crested and begun to set while I was walking, but my tired brain had tried to just keep the same set of rules. I'd almost turned around and started walking north. Concentrate. You have to keep going. Stop every so often and drink. Eat something. I wondered, with my mind now becoming slower as I became more exhausted, how fast I'd been going. 3 miles an hour? 2? If it's 2, I have to keep moving for 15 hours, if my guess was right as to how far I was. 15 hours on my feet, moving constantly. I managed a dry chuckle for a moment, the smell of my sweat momentarily overwhelmingly in the mask. Before Nimbus had beaten me into shape, I probably couldn't have managed to keep moving for 5 hours without resting. Here, of course, I had a unique problem. I couldn't rest here, not real rest. I could pause for a few moments, yes, but I couldn't even sit down, let alone lie down in camp, get a night's sleep. I hadn't brought camping gear, and if someone had suggested it back in the Gnome territory, I would have laughed at them. There wasn't any place in the deadly desert to camp, and, if I got across safe, all the gear I could want would be arriving shortly. But until I got there, I had to stay upright. I had to keep moving. I couldn't stop. I couldn't sit. I had to stay up, or I'd die in this venomous wasteland. I drilled myself into a monotonous routine. 3 dunes forward, stop, regain bearings, checking off the indicators and making sure they agreed with each other. Every 10 stops, drink something. Shadows stretched out far to the left now as the sun dropped swiftly towards the horizon. I slid numbly down the face of a dune, began the next. Part of me realized the setting sun meant I'd been going for close to 14 or 15 hours already. But I hadn't seen Oz yet, not from the top of the highest dunes. Either I was going a lot slower than I thought, or I'd been way off in my calculations. If I couldn't spot Oz from the dune tops, it was at least 8 or 10 miles farther off, maybe more. No choice. And while I wanted to argue that inner voice, I couldn't. I didn't have a choice. There was no other direction left for me to go, nor was there anyone else to help me. Night fell, and sweat dried, replaced by the ache of cold that failed to dull the burning, acid pain of the sand sores that were forming all over me. Move. Feet forward. 3 dunes. Check heading. Stars. Wind direction. Turn slightly this way. Move. The stars turned slowly overhead as I moved. It was strange, I thought, as I kept walking. Light and wind and shadow made it look as though there's other things there. A ghostly shimmer danced from dune to dune, and I started. Polychrome! But she danced by, and suddenly I saw it was just a tiny dust devil. Oh, crap, I'm starting to lose it. I can't afford this. But there wasn't too much I could do. I was eating and drinking from my fast shrinking supplies, but there wasn't anything in the pack to replace sleep, and it was sleep I really needed. Demon had interrupted last night's sleep. I'd taken a little nap before starting out, but that wasn't the same. My knees gave way, and I tumbled down the next dune, burning cold sand stinging exposed skin, a surge of poison going up around me. I gave a tired curse and somehow levered myself up, feeling my head spinning as I did so. Can't do that. Can't. 1 or 2 more like that, and I'll never get up. Never, Zenga said to me with a pout on her face. A hero always gets up. Not hero, I protested honestly, forcing myself to walk since she wasn't stopping. I felt it was rather unfair that she was able to walk on the sand without sinking ankle deep or more. Just lucky, I guess. Walking aimlessly in the deadly desert. This you call luck? I laughed, but it was funny how it sounded more like a cough. I've gotten to do a lot of traveling. Besides, I pointed down, you're just a delusion. No footprints, no feet. I felt very proud of that deduction, and apparently she agreed with me, because she wasn't there the next time I looked up. That was a shame, though, because the Black Desert was terribly lonely. I wondered if the antlions got lonely out here. It must be a terribly boring existence. I stood still, wondering what I was doing on top of the sand dune. The sand looked very soft. I reached down. Ow! Rest is for the winners, not for those who haven't proven themselves, mortal. I shook my hand, trying to get the pain out of it, and glared at Nimbus. You didn't have to hit me that hard. You hit yourself. Take your bearings, Eric Medon. Oh, that was what I was up here for. I blinked and focused. It seemed to take a long time to run through the sequence. In fact, I got confused and had to start again. Okay, this way. I started sliding down the dune. It was hard. My body wanted to just fall, but I knew I couldn't. The next stop, I was puzzled. I kept tipping the canteen up, but nothing was coming out. Finally, Ruggido made me drop it. It's empty, boy. You have to move on. I've got another, I protested. The old gnome was walking ahead of me. Oddly, he looked a lot more like the Neil drawings, a round ball of a body on bandy legs with a wide jeweled belt around his non-existent waist. You need to save that for the day, friend. Oh, I wish he hadn't walked back into that dune. Christ, I'm having a hard time telling reality from these half-waking dreams. I made myself check bearings quickly this time. The last thing I needed was to dream I'd checked them right. But it seemed I drilled that happen in well enough to stick. I could see the dunes a lot better now. Maybe I was finally getting used to the night. The silvery color of the light seemed a bit warmer, too. Light flared across the sand, and I suddenly woke up a bit more with the realization I'd kept moving through the entire night. I almost collapsed. I've been going more than 24 hours, damn it! Have I gotten turned around? Am I just going insanely slow? The wind hissed and chuckled around me, and the acid-burning scent of the sands rose up redoubled. My eyes hurt so badly I could barely squint ahead. A light laugh floated across the dunes. I yanked my head up. Polly was there, dancing at the top of the next dune. She glanced back, laughed again, and danced down the other side. Polly! I called before I realized it was another dream. Nothing of fairy could be here, and certainly not anyone on my side. Trembling legs moved slowly. I staggered more than once, but I reached the top. And for the first time in an age and a half, I felt a glimmer of hope, because far ahead I could see something else, something dark and tinged with purple-green and other colors, stretching from one horizon to the other. That's Oz! The realization that I could see the greatest of the lands of fairy, that I was that close, gave me a spurt of energy that lasted for several dunes. Now I didn't have to check direction except by an occasional glance forward. But it was still a long way off, miles. I drank most of the last canteen in what seemed one long pull, gnawed some salted meat, then finished the water and tossed the canteen aside. I'm almost there. Keep moving. Keep moving. I'll be damned if I'm going to collapse in sight of Oz. I slipped and tumbled, shielding my eyes against the explosion of lethal sand. I'm too weak. I can't get up. Yes, you can. I couldn't believe it. I knew that voice. I looked up at the speaker, a man with white hair and a face whose lines were so very much like my own. Dad? Eric, get up. I know you're tired. It's just a little farther. I'm sorry. I never did finish anything I started. Don't apologize. I somehow got up. He was helping me. I just couldn't quite see how. Just finish this. You're not going to disappoint her, are you? You never met her. He shook his head. I wish I could have. It was then I remembered he was dead, lung cancer. And I reached out as he faded away into the next dune. I felt a tear on my face. I'm not going to disappoint her, Dad. I drove myself on somehow. I fell. I got up, each time sure there was just no way I could manage it, but remembering Polly, remembering her promise to me, I had to make it. Finally, after what seemed an endless time of burning heat and corrosive fumes and sickness dragging like weights, I looked up and realized I was going to fail. Oz loomed up before me, a low plateau rising up out of the lethal sandy sea, and, for as far as I could look in either direction, there was not a single path up. A 50-foot cliff barred any entry. I screamed out my denial, but my throat made it a pained whisper. No. Had I reached here in Thunderchild, I'd have been able to climb that like a mountain goat. Hell, if you'd dropped my untrained overweight self here, I might still have made it up. But I could barely force one foot in front of the other, lift them enough to climb the last small dunes between me and that final barrier. I couldn't possibly climb it. Part of me wanted to laugh, the other to cry. It was unbearably ironic that I had managed to make it through every threat I'd encountered on sea and under rock, walking through the deadly desert itself, killing self-proclaimed demons and monsters of the usurpers, and here, now, I was helpless against a tiny wall of rock. God damn it, I climbed up a 30,000-foot mountain, now 50 feet of rock beats me. But I knew with certainty that it was true. I didn't have the strength left, not even enough to try some true mortal stunt. I was only standing because I knew with the same certainty that if I fell again, I really would never get up again. I looked up, seeing a hint of grassy movement, a flutter of a few purple-tinted leaves. A bird flew a few inches over the edge, turned back, never looking down. Of course, there never was anything to see. I wondered if I could get its attention somehow. And then it hit me. One last chance. I reached inside my armor, which had been at least as cool as any clothing could have been, and grasped the jewel of the bridge. One chance, Polly. The jewel had to reach the land of Oz, lie on its soil. I pulled off the mask, let it drop. I needed to be as unencumbered as possible. I looked carefully, judged the angles, and then wound up and threw the jewel as hard as I could, the very last ounce of strength going into the throw, sending me backward, down, hitting the sand heavily. The glittering jewel arced up, tumbling end over end, rising up, getting closer. Oh no, it's going to hit the cliff! But just as it seemed the multicolored gem would bounce off the dark stone, it reached the apex of its arc and just barely cleared the edge, brushing aside a few blades of grass, and disappearing. My hands were burning where they lay in the sand. I tried to lift them, but they were too heavy. Maybe if I just rest a minute. I wanted to keep my eyes open, but they hurt so much and the sun was so bright. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I had to be there to place the gem. Voices. Almost dead. Can't use magic on him. Do us no good. Dead. I was in terrible pain, but it was also so distant. I felt that all I had to do was let go. Something cool touching my lips. Please, Eric, drink, please. I couldn't even place the voice, but something about it. I had to do what that voice wanted. I opened cracked lips, swallowed, the act of swallowing causing splintering pain. But the moment the first swallow passed through, the pain began to ease. I took another swallow and another, and suddenly everything seemed to be growing clearer as my pain started to fade away. I opened my eyes. A radiant vision of golden hair and violet storm eyes hovered above me, perfect cheeks startlingly marred by 2 tears trickling down. Polly? Eric! Her face lit up, now so beautiful that I couldn't have spoken even if I had to, and she grasped my hands between hers for a moment, that single contact sending a surge of strength through me that had nothing to do with the healing potion. I'm so glad. Believe me, I said, wishing I had the courage to reach out and take her hands again. Not nearly as glad as I am.